Dear friends and comrades, I'm really pleased to welcome you in another edition of our series, Understand to Survive. And I'm really pleased and honored to welcome our British guest, David Clews, editor-in-chief, Unity News Network. Welcome and great to have you here, David.
Well, thank you so much, Konrad, Mateusz. Lovely to be with you and talking about Poland and Europe and the world that we live in.
We would like to start with something which could strongly, again, relates British and Polish affairs. A couple of days ago, the Times published article about new initiative of the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk about arranging new alliance around Ukrainian efforts, which could gather the Great Britain, Poland, and Nordic countries. What do you think about it? Would Great Britain, which already spends, I believe, more than 12 billions on Ukrainian defense help, let's call that way, can afford more to hold the Kiev regime?
Well, there's always plenty of money when it comes to Mr. Zelensky. They always manage to find money down the back of the sofa. And I'm sure if your audience are aware of the dynamics of what's going on in British politics. You've had Keir Starmer's come in. He's the most unpopular prime minister in a record amount of time. He has been an absolute disaster. He's cutting winter fuel payments. So in Britain, elderly people used to get a £300 payment to help them towards the cost of gas and electricity. Keir Starmer has removed that now from people unless they're on benefits. And that cost 1.1 billion per year. Yet he's insisting they're going to keep giving Ukraine 3 billion per annum. And yeah, I mean, in relation to Tusk and the Nordic involvement, I just think that they are positioning themselves from when President Trump returns to the White House, and they are going to try and keep the Ukraine war rumbling on. It certainly seems that Europe and especially Britain are some of the biggest warmongers that are out there, and they just seem to want to prolong this conflict for as long as they can.
And what about the British people? I mean, a lot of people in the United States are aware, and there are a lot of debates about wasting their money for the corrupt Kiev regime. Are the Brits aware of what is going on, and are there any public discussions about the nature of the Kiev regime?
Well, I have to say, at the start, when this all happened in February, the government launched an incredible propaganda campaign. It was wall to wall on the media. I mean, there was Ukraine flags everywhere. It's all died off now. People have lost interest entirely of it. And I think in Britain, just like myself, I am very sympathetic to the Ukrainian people, as I am the Russian people and the Polish. I see this as an internal European family argument that decent people would have de-escalated instead of pushing this. So I think most people now look at it and they think, this has been going on for 2.5 years now. They don't know the full reality of what's happened on the ground, the casualty figures, the maimings, the deaths. I think if people in Britain really knew the reality of how many were dead and injured and the corruption that had taken place, there would be even more anger. So I think the vast majority of people have just moved on from it, or it's apathy. But there is a growing minority that are, they're disgusted. They always see there's plenty of money for Zelensky.
But in the same time, when we know about, less interest of the British people about the Ukrainian conflict, we know that the British political class is strongly involved and strongly interfered with the Kiev regime. And it was, with such a significant example like Boris Johnson's intervention to prevent Istanbul's peace negotiations in already 2022. So do you believe that Starmer is going to continue this line? So would be taken from the United States this position as a main warmonger and the main supporter of Kiev now?
I think it's important for your viewers to recognize Britain is run by a regime. Sometimes the regime is a Tory one, sometimes it's a Labour one, but the British regime fully supports the conflict in Ukraine. They believe in it. So Tory, Labour, it doesn't matter. They're all in support of it. Even the supposed, even the likes of Nigel Farage, who many of your viewers will know, he will voice some skepticism towards it. He'll say that it wasn't necessary, but he'll never go where he needs to go. So all the security service, the media, the British establishment, they're all fully in support of it. And I think Britain's involvement in it is much more ideological as well. They don't like Russia. They have an intense Russophobia, which for some is a relic of the Cold War, but for many of them, it's more due to Russia's stance on, say, same-sex relationships. They don't promote the LGBTQ agenda. They do believe in family values. And for a lot of people in the British establishment, that is considered, they're considered evil for it. And they have a pathological hatred of Russia. And I was talking about that on my show the other night. I don't get it, where it comes from. And they hate Putin. They hate everyone in Russia. As I say, look, clearly we are different from Russia. Clearly Poland is different from Russia, but there are many similarities. And obviously I think Poland is much closer to Russia than the likes of Donald Tusk would like to admit. And as I say, from a Polish perspective, I think by, alienating your next door neighbors in Belarus and Russia and opening Poland up to NATO involvement, to American influence, to globalist influence, I think in the long run, Poland is sowing the seeds of its own demise. And as I say, I've been very disappointed in how the political class in Poland has reacted to this conflict as well.
Well, you told about ideology and the ideological basis of the support for Kiev in Britain. I have a question about the interests. I mean, we know a lot of cases in United States, for instance. For example, Hunter Biden and his businesses in Ukraine, of people who are involved financially and had their own private interest there in Ukraine. Are there any cases similar to the case of Hunter Biden in Britain, in British politics?
No, not as bad. It's funny because we don't have like naked corruption in this country. Like in America, as you say, you had Hunter Biden. He was on the board of Burisma, which was one of the energy companies. You had Mitt Romney's son, Nancy Pelosi's son as well. They were all on boards. No, like with the likes of Boris Johnson will get a book deal out of it. Boris Johnson will, he will get paid to go on speaking tours, but we don't, as I said, that's what makes it even stranger is you can understand the Americans because they used Ukraine as their money laundering hub. They used it for all sorts of nefarious things. Whereas in Britain, the ruling regime, they drank the Kool-Aid. They believe this is a battle between good and evil. So, I mean, they'll have relatives or people that work with the military-industrial complex, but there is the honest answer. There isn't that naked corruption that you saw with the Americans.
I would like to ask about another example of direct British involvement in the escalation with Russia. Together with discussion about the military spending of UK, it's already, I believe, it's planned about more than 55 billion pounds in the next budget. But we have also involvement of the British Army already, because the British and German soldiers, as a part of the joint forces, are present in the Baltic states. So it's, I would say that's just one step from the direct and open conflict with Russia, and it looks like exactly like, I don't know, intervention after the October Revolution. It's again direct first for the first time from the 1990, I believe, and 1920, the British Army is present in the Eastern Europe.
It's insane because we don't have an army anymore. Okay, we don't have a decent military. Our military has been decimated for decades. Yet a lot of people in the British establishment still think that we're in an imperial power. Like, do you remember Ben Wallace, the old defense secretary? He was when we defeated the Tsar in 1888 in Crimea. These people still think Britain is an imperial power. We aren't. We are not an imperial power. We have very little power at all. We are basically a satellite state of the United States of America, and sending these troops over is ridiculous. And what you said about troops on the ground, I'm certain there will be British advisors in Ukraine because they are using these Storm Shadow missiles that they want to target Russia with. Now, Ukrainians don't know how to fire these Storm Shadow missiles. What I believe happens is that you'll have British advisors on the ground. They'll type in all the coordinates. They'll put in all the equipment. They'll do it all. And then at the very last minute, they'll say to the Ukrainians, would you like to come and push this button, please? They'll push the button or they'll turn a key. And that's why Putin has said that any direct attacks on Russia will be considered a red line, because the Ukrainians are not firing these missiles. It's only thanks to British and NATO intervention that Ukraine has the ability to launch these strikes. So he knows that if any missiles flew into Russia, whether they were, I don't think they can get as far as Moscow, but they can get quite far in, that would be Britain that was involved in that, and Britain would become a party to the conflict in Ukraine.
You are running some well-known independent media outlets in Britain. My question is exactly about the media. I mean, we have quite open censorship in Poland when it comes to the issues of Ukrainian conflict. What about Britain? I mean, are you free to criticize the British engagement in Ukraine? Are there any kinds of censorship, for instance, like the rules and regulations which ban you from saying something positive about Russia and negative about Kiev and Zelensky?
Not really. All we don't have is a seat at the table. We do our thing. Alt media does our thing. But the stance that we've taken since February the 22nd, February 22, has never been aired in the mainstream media. Even in the last, maybe only in the last 3 to 4 months, there's been some rumblings around Zelensky and some, but by and large, the British government knows that. The vast majority of people in this country watch the BBC, they watch Sky, they watch ITV, or they watch what the algorithm presents them on YouTube. So we are basically free to say and talk about what we want, but nobody, the simple one is their megaphone is massive. Our megaphone's like a wee tiny thing. So we just can't compete against the mainstream on getting that message out there about Zelensky, about what's happening. We said at the time in February 22, like, clearly there's a backdrop to this story. Clearly things just don't happen for no reason. But people have taken leave of their senses. It's the same as any war or any conflict that's happened. And again, I'm sure there's good guys and bad guys, but there's always reasons for these things that start. And you know, it's actually quite interesting because I get a lot of stick as well because I am not overly a fan of Putin. I don't particularly like him. I don't really like the way Russia's run. I still see Russia as a bit of an oligarchy that doesn't really put their own citizens first. I also believe that if Putin was serious, he would have ended this conflict a lot quicker because the Russian military-industrial complex is growing. There's a lot of people making money out of still creating these weapons. So that's where I am slightly different, is people will accuse us of being Putin shills when that is actually the opposite's true. We're saying that, I mean, by and large, I fully understand why Putin did what he did, but that still doesn't mean that I support the SMO and think it's a good thing. I'd rather it didn't happen, and I would rather we put a stop to this conflict. But the biggest barrier to stopping this conflict is Western and NATO intransigence. As Konrad said at the start, Istanbul was on the table in March 22. Putin said he withdrew the troops from around Kiev because that was an act of goodwill. And then Boris Johnson went over and said, oh, we're going to war. And here we are 2.5 years later, and it's still going on.
Speaking about the oligarchy, I would like to look at these American affairs. But first, one thing about British-American relations, because I was just watching this peace demonstration in Lakenheath. I seen quite similar in Faslane, and it still reminds me that the United Kingdom, from the one point of view, still would like to pretend to be a British empire, but from the another one is just land aircraft carrier for the USA. I would like you to ask about your opinion about American presence in Europe and also in Britain, especially. We have a great return of the American nuclear weapon to the British Islands.
I mean, I'm 100% opposed to it, and I fully, from a different angle, I fully support all these people against it. Now, they say that Britain has an independent nuclear deterrent. It doesn't. The Trident missile system is an American nuclear missile system. The only people who have the final say on that are the Americans. They tried to test it a few years back, and the missiles didn't even fire properly. So as you say, it's like an aircraft landing zone in Europe for the Americans. We should have no American weapons or American missiles on our territory. Neither should Europe. They are a huge source of instability and conflict. And I just don't get why so many people who would consider themselves to be on the traditional right, they support American involvement in Europe. And I think every country needs to regain its national sovereignty. And I mean, as I said, I've been to Poland recently and I saw these huge new bases that are all being built. I see there's going to be a huge big border barrier created with Belarus. And the problem is a lot of people are going to be getting a job out of it. A lot of people are going to be making money out of it. And they won't be thinking of the bigger picture, which is every day that goes on, Britain, Poland, all these countries, they become more of a satellite state of the United States of America. And especially in relation to Poland, because Poland has always been buttressed between different nations during World War II, Germany and the Soviet Union. And then after World War II came under the sphere of Soviet influence. And now the political class is happy for Poland to be sold out to the sphere of American influence. That's not genuine independence or sovereignty. It's just replacing one master with another. And I'm unequivocal on it. We should not have NATO bases in Europe. We should not have foreign troops. And I don't think it's even that radical to say it.
Concerning what you have said about Britain and some kind of historical background as well, some similarities between our countries come to my mind. I mean, we both our nations, at least our political elites, suffer from something which I would call geopolitical phantom pain. I mean, we are still thinking, in the dimension of former Polish kingdom, which was, stretched in the whole large part of Eastern Europe, in today's Belarus, Ukraine, Russia, even some western part of it. And it comes to my mind that the similarities between us is about this geopolitical phantom pain, which means that some of the British think of contemporary UK as of British Empire of the past. Am I right?
They do. And it's so ridiculous because we're not. And it's the same with as you say with Poland. I mean, are you going to create the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and Poland again? It's nonsense. It really is. And it is these. You've got this, as you say, this mix of these elites. They still live in the past, and the neocons as well, and then the globalist involvement. And Britain, as I said, Britain is very guilty of that, especially amongst the army, the officer class. Like you see in the British officer class, they go to the best top schools, the top universities. They still think Britain is a global power when it is not. It is a pale shadow of its former self. It is a base of the Americans, and it's just embarrassing. It really is when you see that. And I think if Britain and Europe are stupid enough to put troops on the ground in Ukraine, then they'll get a rude awakening, because these guys are battle hardened. These people have been fighting now a long time. The war in Ukraine's been going on since 2014. It didn't start 2 years ago. People don't realize that. There's been shooting and artillery fire for a long time. I think you'd find NATO troops on the ground or European troops on the ground would get a rude awakening to what a real combat zone looks like.
I would like to ask, just maybe to conclude our discussion, about your reflections about, well, I would say Trump-friendly audience awakening. A lot of global hopes was related to the Donald Trump's campaign. Many people wanted to see him as the man of the peace, someone who stopped all the wars, or at least transit them from Europe to the other parts of the world. But I would say that first steps of the new administrations, well, order us to be more skeptical, because we see neocons there as well. We see Marco Rubio, we see Michael Waltz, we see Elise Stefanik. So,
yep. I've actually got the evidence. I pointed out that I think Donald Trump made a deal with this pro-Zionist power structure in America, because they clearly want a war with Iran, and a lot of people aren't fully. I don't mean to boast, but I'm quite good at looking forward to the future. Like Ukraine is yesterday's news. When October the 7th happened, the American strategy pivoted to Israel, and Israel is far more important to the American political class than Ukraine is. And what you have in America is you've got a very powerful Zionist, but they're more right wing. So you've got the likes of, say, Ben Shapiro, now Bill Ackman, people like that, the Daily Wire types. They're neocons. They believe in Israel, and I see Trump as paving the way for some sort of conflict with Iran, because Iran is clearly a threat to Israel. Israel would not be able to attack Iran. They don't have the weapons. They don't have the ability. I mean, all they can do is, drop bombs on women and children in built up areas. Israel have shown that they've gone into Lebanon, that they can't get anywhere because they can't do proper combat. They need the American firepower. And there's been a lot of neocons in America. Because again, this is the thing. What you have in America is you've got a very strong Jewish lobby, and you've got a very strong Zionist lobby. Not all Jews are Zionists. Not all the Zionists are Jews. You've then got a big Christian conservative, evangelical, which is most of these people that are going in. They believe that, if we have a World War III, that Jesus will come back. I mean, it's very, very worrying. And Trump is surrounded by these people. One name he didn't mention is Mike Huckabee, who is his new ambassador to Israel. He is a total Christian Zionist. He doesn't recognize the West Bank. I've been predicting for quite a while. I think they're going to pivot away from Ukraine. Everyone will be like, oh, this is great. And then there'll be some form of war with Iran. Now, Trump himself may not want to do that. I still believe that Trump doesn't like war. But then there's always the risk Trump might not be there. They would much rather have J.D. Vance, who is a total neocon, who is much more amenable to that whole world. And the other thing as well about Trump is you heard of Peter Thiel? Do you know who Peter Thiel is? The owner of Palantir, which is it does all this sort of CIA contracting. He's a big supporter of JD Vance. He's involved in all these people are not nice. And I think they're gearing up for a war against Iran because Iran is an existential threat to Israel. And I keep pointing out to people, any war in the Middle East would be a disaster for Europe. Like you're talking tens, if not hundreds of millions of Muslim refugees pouring into Europe. You're looking at what happened with Merkel in 2017. You're looking at 10 times that. So clearly there is a lot to be worried about. I am not confident over the next 4 years with Trump. I used to be a big Trump supporter, but I don't think he's the same man that he once was. I think he took 100 million from Miriam Adelson, who is, just an ultra Zionist, wants to do a lot of things, and I think we're going to have a war in the Middle East.
And again, when we have the war, we have warmongers and also British ones, unfortunately, because we know that British army is again directly involved in the Gaza conflict from the base on Cyprus, Akrotiri and
right.
Bulgaria.
Yeah, and they get involved there, and again, that's a mixture of a few things. You've got this people still think the British as an empire. There's this love affair that people have with Israel. You also do have a very strong Zionist lobby. Keir Starmer is married to a Jewish woman. Keir Starmer is an ultra Zionist, and he is clearly prepared to get involved, and I think we would. But one good thing is maybe the Labour left would then launch a coup on Keir Starmer. And that's the other thing, that in British politics, it doesn't matter whether you're on the right or whether you're on the left. You can't criticise Israel. If you look at Jeremy Corbyn, I mean, I quite liked some of Jeremy Corbyn's stuff. I didn't like a lot of it either. I thought he was he's too left wing for me, but he was honest. And he speaks out against what he sees as an injustice. And the entire British media, the entire British state apparatus basically came together to destroy Jeremy Corbyn and lie about him. And I always say this, I think during COVID, Jeremy Corbyn would have been a far better leader than Boris Johnson because he wouldn't have buckled to Bill Gates. He wouldn't have buckled to big business. I think Jeremy Corbyn would have been much better on the Ukraine conflict. He would have just said, let's keep out. And I think he would have been a hell of a lot better on the Gaza massacre that's taken place. And I think the days of people who are left-wing or right-wing, we need to kind of move on from that. You're either in support of a nation's sovereignty and you're against wars. And that's my fundamental position is some people may not like what I talk about. They may find it extreme or whatever, but I don't start wars. These people start wars. They fund wars. They give weapons, and they get away with it. Like, look at Tony Blair. Tony Blair's a sir, and everybody loves him. And Tony Blair, how many millions dead because of Tony Blair? And it's just horrific. We need to get rid of these. But the problem is the electorate just don't see that. The electorate don't see the fact that that is a uni-party and they support all these wars.
Thank you very much, David. I think that it's very important. I mean, the anti-war movement is beyond the left and right, the traditional left and right. We see the same political processes here in Poland. I mean, we have also people coming from different sides of political barricade and taking their voice and stance against the war and the warmongers. It's very important, and that's also very important for us to hear that in Britain you have the same situation, and well, the situation is quite clear. Yeah? There is the globalist and warmongering political camp, and the anti-war political camp, which comes for sovereignty.
Yeah, it's and it's really bad. And the other thing they've done in Britain is there's this, you might not have heard the term, have you heard it's called counter jihad? Like, you know Tommy Robinson? Do you know Tommy Robinson?
Yes.
You heard of him?
Certainly.
So he's totally on the payroll of like the Israel lobby. So in Britain, you've got this problem where you do have a very big Muslim, community now in this country, and a lot of people aren't very happy about it. So what they do is they take that anger that people have over mass immigration and then focus it towards, regime change in Iran. It's a very strange phenomenon, but like a lot of people fall for it. And that's where it's very duplicitous what is done. And as I'm very consistent, as I say, I'm just against all these wars. I'm against all these conflicts. None of them need to happen. If they do happen, it's really nothing to do with us. The Europe should have been in peace since 1991. You had the fall of the Soviet Union. There was no need for NATO after the fall of the Soviet Union. NATO was a redundant organization because the Warsaw Pact collapsed. You didn't need NATO, but they kept NATO going. And then they showed what they were capable of in Serbia and former Yugoslavia. And they've never stopped. And they've just been a disaster. The overthrow of Colonel Gaddafi was a disaster. Although it wasn't NATO, they were involved. Afghanistan, Iraq. It's just a total disaster. And did anyone ever vote? Like, did you ever vote in Poland to see whether Polish troops should be sent to Iraq? No one ever gets to vote on these things.
And that's, I think, it's despite all of that, I think that it's one optimistic message we could give to our viewers that despite whatever Boris Johnson, Donald Tusk, Keir Starmer trying to convince us, how they try to push us to the World War III, we still are trying, we are still working on a real Polish-British alliance for peace. Of course, alliance not of the governments and the elites, but ordinary people. And being a Pole living in England now and in Scotland previously, I could say that I can see not only similarities between our countries, but also similarities of our needs and of our will of peace. And that's a good message, I believe we could jointly.
100%. And as I say, fundamentally, why are we even having these wars? We're supposed to have advanced. We're supposed to have moved on. Yet here we are. The world's never been more dangerous. And the scenes you've seen in Ukraine, the scenes you've seen in Gaza, they just shouldn't be happening in this day and age. And we as people, I think we just need to be. And I mean, I'm not a pacifist. If the time comes, you have to defend yourself. But these are clearly not wars of defense. These are clearly wars of brutal aggression and an unwillingness to compromise. When sometimes you just have to put your ego to the side and compromise. Which, again, it's, as you say, people like us can do, and normal people do on a daily basis. But when it comes to the people in power, they don't want to compromise. They're bullies, basically.
Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for your participation in our discussion. Understand to survive, zrozumieć, by przeżyć. Our noble guest was David Clews, editor-in-chief of Unity News Network. I encourage everyone to read it, to watch it, to subscribe. And of course, please remember about Wbrew Cenzurze, Without Censorship internet channel. You can find us on Telegram, on X, on Facebook as well. Please watch another fantastic interviews with our guests from all over the world, joined in efforts for peace. Thank you very much.